One daughter is a doctor, the other one is a maid. My father lifted his wine glass and said it proudly, like he had just delivered the punchline of the funniest joke in the world. Then he laughed. A loud, satisfied laugh. And a few people around the Thanksgiving table laughed with him. 14 guests. 14 witnesses. But the sound that stayed with me wasn't their laughter. It was the small voice beside me. My 8-year-old daughter tugged gently on my sleeve and whispered, "Mommy, is being a maid bad?" That question shattered something inside my chest. Because in that moment I realized something painful. My daughter was learning to be ashamed of me, and I had allowed it. But that Thanksgiving night would become the last time I stayed silent. What I said next in front of everyone at that table changed my family forever. My father hasn't hosted a holiday dinner since. But before I tell you what happened that night, you need to understand the 6 years that led to it. Because the man my father was trying so hard to impress that evening was the one person in the room who already knew exactly who I was. 6 years earlier. My name is Clara Bennett. I'm 31 years old. I'm a single mother. And for 6 years, my family called me the maid. Not Clara. Not Lily's mom. Just the maid. It started the week I came back home with nothing but 2 suitcases and a 2-year-old child. The drive from Richmond to our hometown of Brookhaven takes about 2 hours. I remember every mile of that drive. Because my daughter Lily cried most of the way. She kept asking the same question over and over. "Where's Daddy?" I didn't know how to answer. Because 3 days earlier my husband had vanished from our life like a storm that leaves nothing standing. On Tuesday he said he needed space. On Wednesday he emptied our bank account. On Thursday he filed for divorce using his mother's address. By Friday morning I was standing on my parents' porch holding a diaper bag, 2 suitcases, and the last pieces of my pride. My father opened the door. His name was Victor Bennett. Tall, perfectly dressed even at home, the kind of man who believed reputation was more important than kindness. He looked down at my suitcases. Then at Lily in my arms. Then at me. "The guest cottage out back is empty," he said. His voice was calm. Cold. "This is temporary. Don't turn it into a habit. No hug. No 'are you okay?' Just terms and conditions." The cottage. The cottage behind my parents' house was tiny. 300 square feet. 1 small bedroom. A kitchenette with a cracked countertop. And a shower that ran out of hot water after 4 minutes. But it sat on their property. And that meant everything depended on my father's approval. At the time I didn't think much about it. I was just grateful to have somewhere safe for Lily to sleep. Within a week I started looking for work. Cleaning houses. $15 an hour. Cash. A neighbor watched Lily while I scrubbed floors and wiped down kitchen counters in homes that looked like the life I once believed I'd have. I cleaned bathtubs. Polished marble counters. Folded towels in perfect hotel-style squares. And every evening I came back to the cottage exhausted but determined to rebuild something. That same month my older sister Dr. Hannah Bennett finished her dermatology residency. My parents threw a huge dinner party for her. 20 guests. Champagne. A catered meal. I arrived late because I had just finished cleaning a client's house across town. My hands still smelled like bleach. My father stood at the head of the table and announced loudly, "Sorry, Clara is late." She was busy scrubbing someone's bathtub. The room filled with polite laughter. Hannah stared at her plate. I sat down quietly and said nothing. That was the first time he turned my job into a joke. But it wouldn't be the last. Growing up invisible. The truth is, the comparisons between my sister and me started long before I ever moved back home. Growing up, Hannah was the star. She had private SAT tutors, advanced summer programs, college visits to the best universities. When she got into medical school, my father took out a second mortgage to pay her tuition. $400,000. No hesitation. When it was my turn to talk about college, my father sat across from me at the kitchen table and said words that never left my memory. Community college is enough for someone like you. Someone like me. I still hear that sentence sometimes when the world gets quiet. So I went to community college. I paid for it myself. Waitressing. Babysitting. Cleaning the church on Sundays. 2 years later I graduated with honors. No one from my family attended the ceremony. Not one person. The holiday introductions. Every holiday dinner followed the same script. My father loved introducing people. He'd stand proudly beside my sister and say, "This is my daughter, Dr. Hannah Bennett." Guests would nod with admiration. Then he'd turn to me almost as an afterthought. "And this is Clara. Just Clara. Not Clara who worked 3 jobs to graduate. Not Clara raising a daughter alone. Just Clara." My mother never corrected him. Whenever I tried to talk about it, she'd sigh dramatically and say, "Your father just wants the best for both of you. Don't be so sensitive." Eventually I stopped trying to explain. Because some families don't want the truth. They want the illusion. And in our family the illusion was simple. Hannah was the success. I was the disappointment. The idea that changed everything. The idea for my business didn't come from ambition. It came from desperation. After 2 years of cleaning houses across Brookhaven, I noticed something interesting. Our region was filled with luxury vacation homes. Massive properties owned by wealthy families from Washington and Richmond. They visited maybe 4 times a year. The rest of the time those houses sat empty. But empty houses still needed care. Maintenance. Security. Cleaning. Someone to coordinate plumbers, landscapers, deliveries. Most owners were managing everything remotely and doing it badly. That's when the idea formed. Instead of just cleaning houses, what if I managed them? I created a small company, Magnolia Property Services. At the beginning it was just me and a cheap laptop at the kitchen table. I built a simple website at 2 in the morning while Lily slept beside me on the couch. Within 1 month I signed my first 3 clients. 3 properties. It wasn't huge. But it was real. For the first time since my divorce I felt proud of something. So I made the mistake of telling my mother. "Mom," I said excitedly, "I just signed 3 clients for the business." She nodded politely. "That's nice, honey." Then she added, "Hannah just got invited to speak at a dermatology conference in Boston." Just like that, my achievement disappeared. I stood in the kitchen holding my phone and realized something important. Nothing I built would ever matter inside that house. The unexpected phone call. The call came late one night. An unknown number. When I answered, a calm voice said, "Hello, Clara. My name is Evelyn Bennett. I'm your father's sister." I almost dropped the phone. In our family, Evelyn's name was never mentioned. My father had cut contact with her years ago after she divorced her husband. In our small conservative town, divorce carried a stigma. My father considered it a disgrace. But Evelyn stayed in town anyway. She opened an antique shop and lived alone. And apparently she had been watching my life from a distance. We met for coffee the next week. Her shop smelled like cedar and old books. She listened quietly while I explained my business idea. Then she said something that changed everything. "I want to invest in you." She slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a check. $15,000. My heart nearly stopped. "I'm not loaning it," she said. "I'm buying equity. Because someone should have believed in you a long time ago." I stared at her. "Why?" She smiled gently. Because family should be a safe place, Clara. Not a cage. This investment allowed Clara to hire employees and grow Magnolia, setting the stage for the powerful Thanksgiving confrontation. The $15,000 check from Aunt Evelyn felt unreal in my hands. For the first time in years, someone in my family believed I was capable of building something. Not fixing something. Not surviving something. Building something. That difference meant more than I could explain. I used the money carefully. $5,000 went toward hiring my first 2 employees, both single mothers who needed flexible hours just like I once had. Another $3,000 went into insurance and licenses. The rest went into a used van, a better website, and marketing. Within 6 months, Magnolia Property Services had 12 houses under contract. Within a year, we had 27. Most people in town still thought I was just cleaning houses. But what we actually did was much bigger. We managed vacation estates. We inspected properties after storms. We coordinated repairs. We prepared homes before the owners arrived. We handled deliveries, landscaping, and maintenance. We were the invisible system keeping expensive homes functioning smoothly. And the more clients we gained, the faster the business grew. But inside my parents' house, none of that mattered. The nickname. My father discovered the name of my company by accident. One afternoon he walked into the cottage while I was printing invoices. He glanced at the papers on the table. Magnolia Property Services, he read. That's the business. He looked confused. You run a cleaning company. It's a property management company. He waved his hand dismissively. Same difference. Then he smirked. Well, I guess we have a doctor and a maid in the family. That was the first time he said it. But it wouldn't be the last. Hannah's world. My sister Hannah's life continued moving upward. She worked long hours at a dermatology clinic in Richmond. Her Instagram showed glamorous photos of medical conferences, fancy restaurants, and weekend trips to New York. My parents shared every one of those posts with pride. My mother once called me just to say, "Did you see Hannah's article got published in a medical journal?" I congratulated her sincerely. I really was proud of her. Hannah wasn't a bad person. She was simply someone who had grown up in a world where success was measured by prestige. And in our family, prestige belonged to her. The first big client. Everything changed one spring morning when I received an email from a man named Daniel Lawson. He owned 3 waterfront estates near Brookhaven. Each property was worth several $1,000,000. His message was simple. I was given your company's name by Evelyn Bennett. I need reliable property management for 3 homes. I nearly dropped my phone. 3 houses at once would double my company overnight. When we met, Daniel looked around 35, confident but relaxed. He wore jeans and a simple button-down shirt, nothing flashy. But the way he spoke made it clear he was used to people taking him seriously. I've had 3 different management companies in the last 5 years, he explained. They all failed. Why? I asked. They treated the job like cleaning. I smiled slightly. That's not what we do. I showed him our inspection reports, maintenance schedules, vendor contacts, emergency response plans. He studied everything quietly. Then he leaned back in his chair and said something that changed my life. You understand the business. I nodded. Yes. Good, he said. Because if you manage these properties well, I have friends who need the same service. By the end of that meeting, Magnolia Property Services had grown by 3 estates. The secret growth. Within the next 2 years, Daniel kept his promise. He referred client after client. Magnolia expanded quickly. 20 houses. Then 30. Then 40. I hired a full office staff. field managers, maintenance coordinators. By the fourth year, we were managing 62 luxury homes across the region. But very few people in my hometown knew the truth. Because I never talked about it. Not even with my parents. Partly because they wouldn't understand. Mostly because I didn't want their approval anymore. Lily's question. One evening Lily came home from school unusually quiet. She sat at the kitchen table coloring while I cooked dinner. Finally she asked, "Mom." "Yes." "Why does Grandpa say you're a maid?" The knife in my hand froze. I turned slowly. "What do you mean?" "At dinner last week," she said softly. "He told his friends you clean houses." Technically that wasn't a lie. But it wasn't the truth either. I knelt beside her chair. "Do you think cleaning houses is bad?" She shook her head. "No." But everyone laughed. Her small voice cracked. "Are they laughing at you?" That question hit me harder than anything my father had ever said. Because suddenly I realized something painful. My daughter was starting to feel ashamed of me. And that was something I could never allow. I hugged her tightly. "Listen to me, Lily," I said gently. "There is nothing shameful about hard work." She looked up at me. "Nothing. Nothing." The invitation. That autumn my mother called with news. "Your father is hosting Thanksgiving again this year," she said. I wasn't surprised. My father loved hosting holidays. They were his stage. An opportunity to show off his perfect family. "Your sister will be bringing someone," Mom continued. "A surgeon from her hospital." "That's nice," I said. "And you should come too," she added. "With Lily." I hesitated. Family dinners always ended the same way. My father making jokes. Guests laughing politely. Me smiling quietly. But Lily loved seeing her cousins. So I agreed. I had no idea that dinner would change everything. The guest list. The night before Thanksgiving I learned something interesting. Hannah called while driving into town. "Dad invited some business people this year," she said. "What kind of business people?" "Local investors. Some property developers." I smiled slightly. Brookhaven's real estate market had exploded over the last 5 years. Luxury homes. Vacation properties. New resorts. Most of the people investing in those projects were clients of Magnolia. But Hannah didn't know that. Neither did my parents. And I had no reason to tell them. The morning of Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving morning started like any other. Lily helped me bake pumpkin pie. The cottage smelled warm and sweet. For a few hours everything felt peaceful. But when we walked across the yard toward my parents' house that evening, I felt the familiar knot of tension in my stomach. Through the dining room windows I could already see the guests. Crystal glasses. White tablecloth. My father standing proudly at the head of the room. Hosting his audience. The performance was about to begin. And once again, I was expected to play the same role. The disappointing daughter. The maid. But this year something was different. Because several people sitting at that table already knew who I really was. And my father had no idea. By the time Lily and I walked into my parents' house, the dining room was already full. The long oak table stretched nearly from one wall to the other. Crystal glasses reflected the warm chandelier light. The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon candles filled the room. My father loved moments like this. An audience. A perfect stage. "Clara," my mother called from the kitchen. "You're just in time." Lily slipped her hand into mine as we stepped inside. I could feel her nervousness. Family dinners in this house always felt like performances, and even at 8 years old she had learned that something uncomfortable usually happened before the night was over. Around the table sat people I recognized from town. Local investors. Business owners. 2 couples I knew were involved in real estate development. And at the far end of the table sat my sister Hannah beside a tall man in a navy blazer. She waved enthusiastically when she saw us. "Clara, over here." We took the empty seats near the middle of the table. Lily sat beside me, quietly looking around at the unfamiliar faces. My father stood at the head of the table, holding a glass of wine. He always waited until everyone arrived before beginning his introductions. That was his favorite part. The introductions. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began with his usual confident smile, "thank you all for joining us this Thanksgiving." Several guests nodded politely. My father raised his glass slightly and began walking around the table, introducing each family member like items in a display case. "This is my eldest daughter, Dr. Hannah Bennett," he said proudly. Hannah smiled modestly while a few guests murmured admiration. "She's one of the best dermatologists in Richmond." The man beside her, apparently the surgeon she had mentioned, smiled and shook hands with people around the table. Then my father continued. "And this handsome young man is Dr. Andrew Cole, a cardiovascular surgeon." Andrew nodded. Politely. More impressed murmurs. My father loved reactions like that. He fed off them. He slowly walked further down the table. Then he stopped behind my chair. For a brief moment, I wondered if tonight might be different. Maybe he would simply say my name. Maybe he would leave it there. But that hope lasted only a second. The joke. My father placed a hand on the back of my chair and smiled at the guests. "And this," he said casually, "is my other daughter." A few people turned toward me politely. "This is Clara." He paused for effect. Then he added the line I had heard so many times before. "One daughter is a doctor, and the other one is a maid." He chuckled. A few guests laughed awkwardly. Others shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. But my father continued smiling like he had just delivered a brilliant joke. I stared down at my plate. Normally this was the moment when I stayed quiet. The moment when I let the embarrassment pass. But before I could react, a small voice beside me whispered something that froze the entire world. Lily's question. "Mommy." Lily tugged gently on my sleeve. Her eyes were wide and confused. "Is being a maid bad?" The room fell silent. Forks stopped moving. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Every person at the table heard her question. And suddenly the joke wasn't funny anymore. My father shifted uncomfortably. "It was just a figure of speech," he said quickly. But Lily wasn't looking at him. She was looking at me. Waiting for an answer. And for the first time in years, I realized something important. If I stayed silent again, my daughter would grow up believing that my father's words were true. That my work was something to be ashamed of. That I was something to be ashamed of. I couldn't allow that. Not anymore. The conversation begins. I placed my napkin on the table and turned toward Lily. "No," I said gently. "Being a maid isn't bad." Then I looked up. Directly at my father. "In fact," I continued calmly, "taking care of people's homes is a pretty important job." The tension in the room thickened. My father forced a small laugh. "Well, of course it is. But Clara tends to exaggerate her business." I raised an eyebrow. "My business?" "Yes," he said dismissively. "Cleaning houses." A few guests exchanged glances. Several of them looked strangely uncomfortable. At first I didn't understand why. Then I noticed something. Across the table, Daniel Lawson, the man who had become Magnolia's biggest client, was staring at my father with a very serious expression. Because Daniel wasn't just a guest. He was one of the most successful real estate investors in the region. And Magnolia Property Services managed 3 of his estates. My father had no idea. "Daniel speaks." Daniel slowly set his fork down. "Victor," he said calmly. My father turned toward him. "Yes." I think you might be misunderstanding something. The room went completely still. What do you mean? My father asked. Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair. Well, he said casually, Clara doesn't clean houses for me. My father blinked. I beg your pardon? Daniel smiled faintly. She manages my properties. A ripple of confusion spread around the table. Properties, my father repeated. Yes, Daniel said. All three of them. My father's smile began to fade. Across the table, another man suddenly spoke up. Wait a second, he said. You're talking about Magnolia Property Services, right? Daniel nodded. Yes. The man turned toward me with surprise. You own Magnolia? I nodded calmly. Yes. His eyebrows shot up. My company uses Magnolia for 2 of our vacation estates. Another guest leaned forward. Hold on. Magnolia manages the Hawthorne properties too, don't they? Yes, someone else added. And the Lakeview houses. Suddenly multiple voices were talking at once. People comparing notes. Mentioning properties. Mentioning contracts. Mentioning my company. My father sat frozen at the head of the table. His face slowly turning pale. Because the story he had been telling for years, the story about his daughter the maid, was suddenly collapsing in front of everyone. And the people correcting him weren't strangers. They were his guests. The truth revealed. Daniel finally raised his hand to quiet the table. Victor, he said gently, I'm not sure you realize this, but Clara's company manages more than 60 properties across the region. My father stared at him. 60? Yes. Several guests nodded in agreement. Daniel continued. Magnolia is one of the most reliable property management companies in Brookhaven. Another man added quietly. Probably the best. My father slowly turned toward me. For the first time in years, he looked completely speechless. Is that true? He asked. I met his eyes calmly. Yes. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to break the table. After Daniel explained that Clara owned Magnolia Property Services, the entire table became quiet. Several guests began talking at once, realizing they were already working with Clara's company. One man said, Magnolia manages our lake house. Another added, your team handled our storm damage last year. Clara's father, Victor, sat frozen. For years he had proudly told people his daughter was just a maid, but now the truth was unfolding in front of his own guests. Clara stayed calm. She wasn't angry anymore. She was simply tired. My company started small, she said quietly. But we grew. Victor stared at her, shocked that he knew almost nothing about his own daughter's life. Victor tried to recover his confidence. Well, cleaning is still part of the business, he said awkwardly. Clara nodded. Yes, it is. Then she added gently. And there's nothing wrong with that. She looked down at Lily beside her. I built this company so my daughter would never feel ashamed of honest work. The words landed heavily in the room. For the first time, several guests looked at Victor with clear discomfort. Because suddenly the joke didn't sound funny anymore. It sounded cruel. Clara's sister Hannah finally broke the silence. Dad, you didn't know about Magnolia? Victor looked confused. No. Hannah sighed. It's one of the fastest growing property management companies in the region. She turned toward Clara. You manage more properties than most agencies. Clara shrugged slightly. I just worked hard. For years Hannah had unknowingly benefited from their father's pride. But even she seemed surprised by how little he understood about Clara's success. While the adults talked, Lily quietly pulled on Clara's sleeve again. Mom. Yes, sweetie. Does that mean you're the boss? Clara smiled. Yes. Lily's eyes lit up. So Grandpa was wrong. The room became quiet again. Clara didn't answer directly. Instead she hugged her daughter and said softly, "Grandpa just didn't know the whole story." The rest of dinner felt awkward. Conversations became smaller and quieter. Victor barely spoke. For the first time in years, the confident host at the head of the table seemed unsure of himself. When dessert arrived, several guests congratulated Clara privately. One woman said, "Your company handled my sister's property. You're doing amazing work." Clara thanked them politely. But what mattered most wasn't their praise. It was the look on her daughter's face. Pride. Later that night, Clara and Lily walked back to the small cottage behind the house. The cold autumn air felt peaceful after the tension of dinner. "Mom?" Lily asked again. "Yes. I'm proud of you." Clara felt tears sting her eyes. Because that simple sentence meant more than any approval her father could ever give. Over the next few months something changed. Victor stopped making jokes about Clara's job. In fact, he rarely mentioned it at all. One afternoon he quietly visited Magnolia's office. He looked around at the staff working inside. Phones ringing. Schedules on the walls. Employees coordinating property inspections. He turned to Clara and said something he had never said before. "I underestimated you." It wasn't a full apology, but it was the closest he had ever come. Years later, Lily gave a school presentation about her parents' jobs. When it was her turn, she stood proudly in front of the class and said, "My mom owns a company that takes care of houses for people when they aren't there." Her teacher smiled. "That sounds important." Lily nodded confidently. "It is." Because in the end, Clara learned something her father never understood. Success isn't about titles. It isn't about prestige. It isn't about impressing people at a dinner table. Real success is building a life where your children never feel ashamed of who you are. And Clara had done exactly that.